the sun. God embedded this illustration for us in our world. I think the Lord often uses things that we can see to help us understand spiritual realities. How many times have we observed or enjoyed a beautiful sunrise or a beautiful sunset? Back when we were on vacation a few weeks ago, we were able to go out, and as the sun was setting in the ocean, there was a lighthouse, and it was able to. The sun was right behind, just to the left. I mean, it looked like somebody painted. You know, it was just a perfect, beautiful picture. We enjoy God's designs built in this world, but that's not my point for this morning. I want us to look beyond the beauty of the sun to its design. When the sun begins to be unveiled and arises, the lower extended atmosphere, we increasingly avoid looking at the sun's glory. It's just too bright, and it's too hot. When the sun shines in its full brilliance and radiance, we can't look at it. We don't dare look at it because it will hurt us. You see, we avoid viewing the bright sun. You and I keep our eyes down, respecting the sun's greater power. We wisely bow our heads. Perhaps we shield our eyes with a hat brim or with sunglasses, always taking action to divert our vision from looking directly at the sun. You see, brethren, the sun is not our equal. It possesses greater power over us. How many times have we been driving down the road and we whip that visor down in our cars to shield our eyes from the glaring sun? My question is this: if we bow our heads before the bright sun, which the Lord created with His Word, how much greater is He? How dare we treat God with such familiarity, assuming that we need no atonement to come into His presence? It's equal folly to consider our viewpoint as superior to His. If there are things on the earth that we cannot stare at and turn our heads down into submission before it, how much greater is God's glory? We have so much to learn from God's powerful and holy ways. I hope that I can soon gain more reverence for God. It was asked that we have a lesson on reverence. As I was studying, I came across this verse, and it was one of the verses that Lincoln read this morning. I never noticed it, never noticed one word in that verse until I was studying it. Hebrews 5 and verse 7. In the days of His flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to Him who was able to save Him from death. And He was heard because of His reverence. Jesus cried out to His Father, and it says He was heard because of His reverence. I put this up here so I made sure it was said right. There is such a great difference between the holiness of God and the unholiness of men. Yet it seems like today we relate to God as something that's maybe just a little higher than ourselves. Someone we share our smallness with. He's no longer revered as the infinite, almighty, holy God that created us. He is no longer to be feared, no longer given reverence. I think there's a lot of truth in that, isn't it? We know we live in a world that everything around us, we should be filled with reverence in every aspect of our lives. Has the church lost the fear of the Lord? I struggled some just trying to think about how I wanted to go about talking about this and looking at it and different things. And I said, well, you know what, we can just look at a lot of scriptures that talk about the fear of the Lord and reverence for the Lord and these things. And we could spend the whole time just looking at passages. It's amazing how many passages. I looked up the New King James Version, and I looked up, just typed the fear of the Lord. Fear of the Lord. How many times is it said? Just in the Old Testament, 27 times. And then when you have fear God in there, you add another 17 times to that. So 44 times just talking about fearing God and the fear of the Lord. Have we lost that, brethren? This idea of fearing the fear of the Lord or the reverence for the Lord. Well, I tell you one thing. Let's go back to the sun for a minute. What happens when you lose the fear of the sun? It hurts, doesn't it? Didn't take long for your body to react. Yeah, it burns. That's right. It burns. And if you look at it with your eyes, you will be permanently damaged with your eyes. So what is reverence, right? What does it mean? What is reverence? Well, if you just go to Webster, first, honor or respect felt or manifested. Profound respect mingled with love and awe. So it's very close to words like honor, respect, and admiration. And even includes these thoughts, doesn't it? There is a difference between worship and reverence. Okay, I want to make sure we understand that. Matthew 4 and verse 10, when Jesus was talking to the devil, remember he said, "You shall worship the Lord your God and serve Him only." Okay, worship the Lord your God. But yet in Ephesians 5:33, there is a word there used, and it's talking about wives should respect their husbands. Okay? Wives are not to worship their husbands, right? but they are to respect their husband. So there is a difference between those words. And we need to be aware of that. However, reverence or respect is an essential of worship. Proper worship is to have reverence or respect for the Lord. Psalm 96 and verse 9, worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness. Tremble before Him, all the earth. Tremble before Him, all the earth. You don't think that it was just a coincidence that Jesus decided to make this big, huge ball of fire as our great light, the sun? That the earth rotates around, the sun. It's the solar system that we talk about and all these, and everything. Without the sun, we would die. You don't think it's a coincidence how great and awesome that thing is? He's trying to teach us a lesson. Why, then, should reverence for God be above all? Why should it be above? And I think we've already really hit some things, but we got to remember this, that He is the Creator. He is the Creator of all. Genesis 1 and verse 1, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The creature should certainly fear, love, and respect his Creator. But that's not always true. Romans 1 talks about that. Those that did not see fit to acknowledge God as the Creator. What happens when we do not acknowledge God as the Creator? We start worshiping and serving the creatures, those things that God made. Man has at times made a miserable failure of his mission in glorifying God. And brethren, we should make sure that we are doing our best not to be a failure when it comes to this. Psalm 2:11, serve the Lord with reverential awe and rejoice with trembling. Why should reverence for God be above all? He is the Creator. Number 2, man is dependent upon God as a guide. Jeremiah 10:23 says, for I know it is not in man to guide his own steps. We cannot do it. We need God. And what happens is when we start going out on our own and we're thinking we can do all things ourselves, our own strength, our own might, we just kind of leave God behind. We lose that reverence for God, that respect and admiration that is due Him. God, who is so good to supply us with such means of guidance, should be an object of our deepest reverence. Men should show great honor and respect to those who guided them to safety and greatly helped in making them what they are today. Think what God has done for His children. Think what God has done for His children. Man is dependent upon God as a guide. And another reason is that God is the Father of our spirits. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 9. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 9. It says, furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? We think about our earthly fathers when they did things. We respect them for that. Maybe when we grow up and get older, right, we understand what they were doing it for, why they were doing it. How much more should the Father of spirits be respected and reverenced? God has made our bodies and is the Father of spirits. Both body and spirit must unite in reverential service to Him. So then that begs the question then, we say, yes, we should reverence God, right? We should do these things. Well then how may we show our reverence for God? How are we going to show that to Him? Well, first of all, brethren, it should start with His name. We should reverence His name. You ever heard someone say, well, you know, Reverend so-and-so did this or that, or Reverend so-and-so did this. And the word reverend is only found once, and that's in the King James Version of the Bible. When it does appear, it's in Psalm 111, and it has reference to God. Now listen to me, brethren. It is a lack of reverence for God to refer to any man as reverend. As we said, just as the Son is not our equal, God is not our equal. We reverence His name by also not using it in a vain way. Once again, in searching and studying on this, I came across this that said that it was said that the original scribes, those that were writing the Scriptures, they were transferring the Scriptures from this to this, they were writing those down. All they're doing is just, they're copying the Scriptures down. It says when they would come to the name of God in the sacred writings, that they would stop and they would clean out their pens. In fact, it said they would go and clean up, take a shower, change their clothes before they would continue. Because they respected and reverenced the name of God. Matthew chapter 6 and verse 9 tells us that God's name is to be hallowed and not used in vain. It's never right or proper to use profanity or even euphemistic bywords such as gosh or golly or gee or lordy, which are corrupted forms of God's name. And in our social media age, with all of the things that we're able to do with our phones, OMG should not be used by Christians. End of story. His name should never be used in any light, useless, or flippant way. We are to reverence His name. But we are also to reverence His Word. One cannot reverence God and then disrespect His Word. He who reverences the Word will not twist it or pervert the Scriptures to their own destruction. 2 Peter 3 and verse 16. You remember we talked about just in the last couple of weeks the call of Isaiah. You remember Isaiah the prophet. He says in Isaiah 66 and verse 2, Isaiah writes, God speaking through Isaiah, but to this man will I look, even to him that is poor and of a contrite spirit, and trembleth at my word. Have you ever read something and it moved you so much you started trembling? I would never forget, several years ago, many years ago now, we were living in Cookville. And one of the men there, one of the preachers, Brother Abe Martin, he had contracted cancer. And so he was not able to come out and worship anymore. And it was nearing the end of his life. The cancer was going to take him, and he knew it. He realized it. And at the end of towards the end of his life, he wanted to be able to worship God. He wanted to partake of the Lord's Supper. And so there was a few of us that got together. They asked us to go and to have a service at his house. And we went on a Sunday afternoon or something, and we went to his house and we had a service. And I remember he partook of the Lord's Supper. And when he started taking the cup, he started trembling. And it wasn't because of the cancer, because he was realizing what he was doing. It meant so much to him. Do we tremble? Or do we respect God? Do we reverence God, His name, His word so much that we will tremble at it? Or do we look for excuses while we're not doing it? We're looking for reasons. Well, does it really mean that? Does God's Word really mean this or that? Well, you know what? I don't know. That's just your interpretation of it. And that's what the world is saying, right? And if we're not careful, we start acting like the world. Every time you start acting like that, brethren, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go outside and take off your sunglasses, and I want you to look directly at the sun. That should be our reminder that God's not our equal. Just like we respect that sun, we better respect the one that made the sun. So many seem to appear to have lost the proper reverence for His Word. Brethren, our attitude betrays us. Our attitude betrays us. We should not only reverence His name, reverence His word, we should reverence His commandments. We can't reverence the person and scoff at His word and the commandments that we are to obey. 1 John chapter 5 and verse 3, "For this is the love of God, that we keep His commandments, and His commandments are not grievous." When we wholeheartedly obey, we are proving our love for the Lord and showing reverence for His commandments. Brethren, it is the curse of inconsistency to contend that we have reverence for God and then refuse to do what He has for us to obey. How may we show our reverence for God? We reverence His name. We reverence His word. We reverence His commandments. We'll say, well, what else is left? Well, there's one more. We should reverence the worship of God. We should reverence His worship. To enter the court of praise with fear and devotion, respect and love are the highest thoughts of reverence. In every service, brethren, we should understand that we are in the presence of God. Generally speaking, our actions depict the feelings that are in our hearts. Outward signs are indications of inward feelings. Did you hear that? Outward signs are indications of inward feelings. Talking, laughing, unnecessary gestures in the service do not depict an atmosphere of reverence. But brethren, with proper preparation and thought, things that tend to disturb the spirit of reverence in the worship could easily be eliminated. Some may deny the fact that they lack reverence, but it's hard to convince others that they possess it by their conduct in the assemblies. God knows our hearts, brethren. As we talked about last week, God knows our hearts. We cannot deceive Him. We must possess proper reverence for God if we hope to enter heaven. Hebrews 12 and verse 28, another passage for us to think about. Therefore, let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. And thus let us offer to God acceptable worship. Listen, with reverence and awe. Did you hear that? In order to offer acceptable worship, it must be with reverence and awe. Part of reverence for worship services, brethren, is preparation. Preparation. Attendance. Brethren, we all understand this. We all know this. With work, we understand it. Tardiness is a habit. There's some that you know they're always going to be late. That's just it. They're in the habit of it. Do you prepare to be at the worship service before it starts? That is a sign of our reverence and respect for God. If you are working somewhere and they want you to be there, you have to be there at 8 o'clock. If you show up at 8:10 more than a few times, guess what? You're not going to be working there very long. Announcements, prepared, concise. We don't want to distract from the service because of announcements, right? Our worship, singing, songs prepared, it should help the worship along a certain thought pattern. Song leaders, we're to prepare these things. Prayer should be sincere but prepared for the benefit of the congregation. We understand that. The Lord's Supper, provide an atmosphere conducive for the occasion. Remember, everything's about to try to help us get closer to God, right? To reverence Him, to honor Him, respect Him. Our giving, preparation from each member in our giving. The preaching. Preachers, guess what? We've got to prepare ahead of time. We've got to make sure that it's Bible-based. Prepared to help the worshiper to draw closer to God. That's the key. This is just a small part of its preparation for our worship. Brethren, our worship services should be intense. And what I mean by that is that we're not here to be entertained. You're not here to watch a show. We must all be engaged in the worship, not playing on our phones. So it says, well, I got the Bible on my phone. Oh, okay. I got the Bible on my phone, but, it's amazing. I'm not even giving them scriptures, and they're just moving around and doing everything. Okay, don't think we can't see, guys. Come on. Worship, we're engaged in worship of God, and it doesn't matter what I see anyway. Okay, and I want to make sure you understand that, because here's the point. God knows our hearts. I'm not the security police, right? And sit over here, oh, you're on your phone, get off your phone, you do this, you do that. Oh, you're sleeping, oh, you do this, you do that, okay. It doesn't matter. I can try to keep everybody engaged, I can try to do this, but if your heart's not in it, God already knows it. God already knows. Brethren, we do not want to be a distraction in worship, in our reverence to God, talking, taking care of children. In the worship service is not the time to be trying to talk to your child and teach them a lesson, okay, right there. It's time for worship. You teach them, you take them out, teach them. Okay, if you need to do it, then take them out and teach them. Teach them before they get there, teach them afterwards. Remember, we're all to be engaged in that. And it's hard, isn't it, when you have children? It's hard to stay focused. And we understand that. Guess what? Look. God knows it's hard for you too. But you're to try. You're to show Him the honor and respect if you have children or if you don't have children. Playing with babies, right? We can get distracted, right, by watching the baby in front of us. Oh, look at that, and you're, oh, good, doing all that stuff. And it's easy to do that, isn't it? It's easy to get caught up in that. And guess what? All of a sudden, we don't know what's going on in the worship service. Think about these things. We don't want to be a distraction. We should always be giving God our best. When people visit, and we have quite a few visitors from time to time, they can tell if our worship is real and reverent to God. And brethren, there's some people, that's what they're looking for. Some people are coming to look and say, are these people real? Are they reverent in their worship to God? God knows our hearts. And brethren, let me say this, because I thought about taking this out and say, and I got to say it. Okay? Just because we say we've got to be reverent and all, that doesn't mean that we're not happy in our worship. That doesn't mean that we're not to rejoice. Listen to what Psalm 2:11 says. Worship the Lord with reverence, that's what we're talking about, and rejoice with trembling. Once again, we should be the happiest people in the world because our sins are forgiven. Whatever country is ever going to attack us, and there's going to be one eventually, do something, they could drop a bomb right here in Medina, on the Medina Church of Christ, and we could all die. But guess what? We're showing the proper reverence and respect to God. We're going to be in heaven with Him. So we can be happy. We can rejoice. But here's what I'm afraid of, brethren. Do we rejoice in the Lord, or do we rejoice when worship is over? Whew, we're done. Yes, let's go. When do we get excited? Well, we get excited we go to a ball game, right? When do we get excited? Brethren, you can show reverence and awe to God and still be joyful. Remember, brethren, worship should mean something. We are coming before the Lord. Habakkuk chapter 2, 19 and 20. He's first talking there about those that are trying to worship things that they made. Idols. Wooden images. But notice what he says there in verse 20. What he says there is covered with gold and silver. They may make it all pretty and make it look everything. That's all. This is great. Let's worship this thing. He says, but there's absolutely no life in it. The Lord, though, is in His holy temple. All the earth should keep silent in His presence. We've said this before, brethren. Everybody talks about, when I get to heaven, I'm going to ask God some questions. I got some questions for Him. Boy, I got to have some answers. Brethren, if we get to heaven, when we get to heaven, we're going to fall down and worship Him. If you bow before the sun, because that sun hurts your eyes, you don't think you're going to bow before God? He made that little ball of fire out there. That little ball of fire that's so many hundreds of times larger than the earth. As we close this morning, Hebrews 12, 28 and 29, therefore let us be grateful for receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. We should be grateful for that, brethren. And thus let us offer to God acceptable worship with reverence and awe. For our God is a consuming fire. Another translation of this same verse. Therefore, we must be thankful that we have a kingdom that cannot be shaken. Because we are thankful, we must serve God with fear and awe in a way that pleases Him. After all, our God is a destructive fire. I thank you for your attention this morning. I hope you'll think about these things. Think about applications, how we can do better to reverence God in every area of our life. It's good for families to talk about these things. Talk about how we can reverence God in all of our areas of life. Show reverence toward God in every way. Let us set the proper example in helping others and showing others that we respect God. First of all, let's watch our speech. Let's watch our speech and make sure we give reverence to God and His name and His Word and His commandments and His worship. Let's reverence God. If you're here this morning and you need help, you need God's help, you need the prayers of the congregation, or you need to obey the gospel, to turn to your Creator, your Savior. If we can help you in any way, we urge you and beg you to come while we stand and sing.